The cabin was buzzing with the low hum of the engines and the soft rustle of passengers settling in, yet an almost tangible tension filled the air. My sister, Sarah, age 25, had claimed the window seat, a quiet little corner she loved for the view and privacy. She wore a soft pink blouse, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, and she leaned slightly toward the aisle, clutching her book with a faint nervousness. Beside her, I, 33, tried to maintain calm in my gray suit, scanning the cabin, alert but composed, aware of how quickly air travel could turn chaotic. Everything seemed normal, the familiar clicks and clunks of tray tables and seat belt soothing, until the sharp crack of a voice pierced the calm. Rachel, a 40-year-old woman with a commanding presence and a bright yellow polo stretched tightly across her frame, appeared in the aisle. Her blonde hair fell in untamed waves, framing a face twisted in irritation. She was not just loud. She was volatile, a storm in human form. Behind her, her 16-year-old son trailed, slightly hunched, with a phone clutched in his oversized hands, seemingly oblivious to the tension he was causing. He was heavy-set, awkwardly maneuvering in the narrow aisle, giving off an air of entitled smugness that matched his mother's intensity. "You, get up. My son needs that window seat," Rachel bellowed, her voice echoing against the cabin walls. She swung a fist for emphasis, not aiming to strike, but to intimidate, the forceful gesture sending a few passengers recoiling. The cabin fell into a hushed silence. The clatter of personal items momentarily halted as heads turned. Some passengers raised eyebrows, others shifted nervously in their seats, all caught between curiosity and discomfort. I leaned slightly forward, trying to meet her fury with calm reason. "Ma'am, that's my sister's seat. She's been sitting here since boarding," I said, my voice firm yet measured, careful not to provoke a confrontation that could escalate. Sarah shifted beside me, her fingers tightening around her book, eyes wide but resolute. Rachel's lips curled into a sneer, a dangerous mix of disbelief and self-righteousness. "I don't care. He's my son, and he has the right to be comfortable. That's what parents do. Move her." Her words were sharp, slicing through the polite murmurs of the cabin, demanding attention and obedience. I shook my head, keeping my composure. "This isn't a negotiation. She's in her seat. You'll have to find another way to make him comfortable." Her eyes narrowed, the kind of glare that promised escalation. She leaned in, her chest thrust forward aggressively, and a few nearby passengers instinctively edged away. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? Do you know who I am?" Sarah's hand gripped my arm. I could feel the tension radiating off her, a mixture of fear and indignation. I don't want trouble," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, just let him sit somewhere else." Rachel laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound that turned heads. "Somewhere else? This is a window seat. He deserves the window. Everyone knows that window seats are the best." Her tone dripped with entitlement, the kind that made the world revolve around her whims. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that silently begged for someone to step in. The cabin crew, alerted by the commotion, appeared in the aisle a few rows away, their faces composed but cautious. They were professionals, trained for turbulence, not entitled tantrums. I caught the stewardess's eye, a brief nod acknowledging the unfolding chaos, but she hesitated to intervene fully, sensing the potential for explosive confrontation. I leaned slightly toward Rachel, keeping my voice steady but firm. "I understand your concern for your son, but that seat is already taken. There are plenty of other options. Please, let's not make this a scene." Her response was immediate and hostile. She planted her hands on her hips, towering over us, a living wall of confrontation. "I don't care about options. My son is bigger than these seats, and I am not moving. You will move her." Sarah's book slipped from her fingers as she clutched the armrest, her face pale. The tension in her eyes mirrored my own frustration. We had tried reason, but it was clear that Rachel was impervious to logic. Her entitlement had become a physical force, her body language aggressive, her tone a weapon in this confined space. The son, oblivious to the growing tension, fiddled with his phone, recording snippets of the confrontation. He looked up occasionally, smirking as if enjoying the drama, entirely confident that his mother's fury would bend the rules in his favor. That smugness only added fuel to the fire. Rachel's voice rose another octave, sharp and commanding. "Excuse me. This is ridiculous. Do you think I'm going to let my child suffer while she sits comfortably? Move her." I could feel the eyes of nearby passengers on me, a mix of sympathy, judgment, and quiet support. Their silent observation was heavy, an audience to the absurdity of entitlement turned into public spectacle. My sister squeezed my hand, a silent plea for protection and reassurance. I could hear her heartbeat in that brief contact, rapid and anxious, matching the flutter of tension that coursed through the cabin. The stewardess finally stepped closer, speaking with a calm but firm authority. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. We can work on a solution, but yelling and aggressive gestures are not allowed." Rachel's response was to scoff and lean even closer, ignoring the crew entirely. Her arrogance was palpable, radiating like heat in the cramped space, and she refused to yield an inch. Solution? There is only one solution. He gets the window seat. Now. A ripple of whispers swept through the cabin, passengers exchanging incredulous looks. Some subtly recorded the scene, others leaned forward to watch, the drama unfolding like a slow-motion collision. The tension was almost unbearable, the confined space amplifying every gesture, every shouted word. I realized then that diplomacy had failed. No amount of reasoning, no appeal to civility would sway her. She thrived on dominance, on bending others to her will, and she would not relent quietly. My sister's anxious glance and the growing discomfort of our fellow passengers signaled that the moment demanded action, a new approach. I took a deep breath, letting my calm mask the rising frustration. I studied Rachel, noting the subtle tells of her arrogance, her obsession with control, her desperate need to appear in command. This was not just about a seat. It was about pride, and pride was her weakness. Sarah's whispered words broke through my thoughts. "What do we do now?" I squeezed her hand gently, leaning close. "We can't fight her with words. We need a smarter way." Rachel's yelling had begun to echo again, her son filming every second, blissfully unaware that the chaos was beginning to turn against them. I could feel the eyes of the cabin on us, the weight of their silent anticipation pressing like a physical force. In that moment, I knew the confrontation was far from over. The storm was brewing, and we were about to navigate it carefully, using her own arrogance against her. The cabin, once a quiet sanctuary, had become an arena, the air thick with tension, anticipation, and the faint, electric thrill of an impending payoff. I glanced at my sister, whose pink shirt seemed almost to glow under the harsh cabin lights, her expression a mix of fear and determination. This was the opening, the spark that would ignite the chain of events leading to justice and karma. Rachel stomped her foot impatiently, her glare cutting across the aisle like a blade. She thought she had already won, that her demands were absolute. But she had no idea that her overconfidence had just planted the seeds of her own undoing. The cabin fell momentarily into a charged silence, every passenger sensing the tension but unaware of the impending twist. I straightened in my seat, letting a calm mask settle over my frustration, my mind already turning, plotting the steps that would turn this confrontation into a spectacle of poetic justice. And then, with one final defiant shout from Rachel, the stage was set. The air hummed with suspense, the kind that grips the stomach and quickens the pulse. No one moved, no one breathed freely. Every eye was fixed, waiting. The battle for the window seat was just beginning, and the consequences would be far more dramatic than anyone could imagine. The cabin seemed to shrink under Rachel's towering presence, her every movement amplified by the narrow aisle. I could feel the tension thickening like fog as she leaned closer to Sarah, her voice a whip of entitlement. "Do you understand? He gets the window. You don't get to decide. Move," she demanded, her words sharp and unforgiving. Her son, oblivious to decorum, shifted impatiently, the phone still recording as if capturing proof of their victory. I stayed calm, though every instinct urged confrontation. Diplomacy had failed. Every polite request, every appeal to reason, had bounced off Rachel's wall of arrogance. I leaned slightly toward her, voice steady, measured. "Ma'am, this seat is occupied. Your son can choose any other seat, or the crew can assist. There's no reason to escalate." Her laughter cut through the cabin, harsh and incredulous. "Escalate? I've been escalating since you even looked at us wrong. This is simple. He sits here and you obey." The insistence in her tone made it clear she believed the rules of social decency did not apply to her. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to each other. Others tried to avoid eye contact, unwilling witnesses to a spectacle they hoped would end soon. The stewardess approached again, her calm demeanor professional yet cautious. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice. We are prepared to help, but safety and comfort rules cannot be ignored." Rachel's eyes narrowed, and she leaned into the stewardess, chest forward, a living wall of confrontation. "Safety? Comfort? My son's comfort comes first. Do you want trouble? Because this is trouble. Move her now." I could feel Sarah's hand clutching mine under the armrest. Her fingers were tense, trembling slightly, eyes darting between Rachel and me, silently pleading for resolution. I don't want to cause a scene," she whispered, her voice small but firm. I squeezed her hand gently, maintaining my composure. "It's not your scene. We'll handle this." Rachel's fury escalated. She stomped the floor in frustration, swinging her arms as if to emphasize the gravity of her demands. "You think I'm bluffing? Do you know who my son is? Do you know who I am?" Her son finally spoke, the voice dripping with smug confidence. "Mom's right. This is ridiculous. I want the window seat." His words carried the weight of entitlement, the kind that assumes the world bends to them. I took a deep breath, realizing that any further direct confrontation would only escalate the situation. Rachel thrived on dominance, her pride feeding her sense of invincibility. It was her armor, and it left her blind to subtle manipulation. This was not a problem solved by argument. It required strategy. I whispered to Sarah, careful not to draw Rachel's attention. "Stay calm. Let her rage, but watch and listen. There's a way to turn this around without violence." Sarah nodded, eyes wide, gripping my arm tighter. I could feel her heartbeat through her fingers, rapid and anxious, mirroring the cabin's growing tension. Rachel continued her tirade, oblivious to the fact that each shout, each exaggerated gesture, revealed cracks in her control. Her son fidgeted, filming the scene for what he imagined would be social media fame, oblivious that the optics were beginning to shift. Every move they made drew the cabin's eyes. Every shout made the passengers more aware of Rachel's volatility. The audience was silently turning, noticing the arrogance, the entitlement, the chaos. I studied Rachel carefully, noting every tell. Her pride, her obsession with public perception, her need to appear in command at all times. These weaknesses were subtle but powerful, and they offered a path forward. A plan began to form in my mind, one that would exploit her own arrogance against her. I leaned toward Sarah again, voice low. "Watch her reactions. She's desperate to look like she's winning. We'll use that." Her eyebrows knitted together. "How?" "She's impossible. She won't listen to reason." "She will listen," I replied, "just not to us. She'll listen to herself and her need to look dominant. That's the leverage." Rachel, meanwhile, had grown louder, more animated, drawing even more attention. Every flinch from nearby passengers, every hesitant glance, fed her sense of importance. She believed she was the center of the cabin's world, and that belief would soon be her undoing. I caught the stewardess exchanging a glance with her colleague. They were cautious, but willing to act subtly, responding to the tension without escalating it. I realized we could work within the rules without needing outright confrontation. Timing, positioning, and Rachel's own behavior were the keys. The son, still recording, shifted slightly, giving me an idea. His phone could act as an unwitting ally, capturing every exaggerated gesture, every misplaced outburst. I leaned back slightly, feigning passive acceptance, letting Rachel's pride build. Finally, Rachel said, as if sensing a victory in my restraint. "See? I told you. This is what happens when people listen to me." She threw a triumphant glance at her son, who grinned, convinced of their upper hand. I let her revel for a moment, careful not to interrupt the illusion. The cabin hummed with suppressed tension, every passenger aware that a confrontation was simmering but unsure of its outcome. The air itself seemed taut, thick with anticipation, like the pause before a storm breaks. Rachel's movements grew more erratic. She gestured wildly, pointing, waving, stamping her feet. The stewardess tried to intervene delicately, but each attempt was met with louder resistance. Every protest Rachel made drew more eyes, more silent judgment, more unspoken support for Sarah and me. I whispered again to Sarah, "Now we wait. Watch how far she will go to maintain control. That's the moment we strike, not with force, but with cleverness." Sarah's breath hitched slightly, the tension almost unbearable. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked, eyes wide with a mix of fear and anticipation. "I am," I said, though I knew the risk was high. She's predictable. Her need to dominate, to appear right in front of everyone, is her weakness. It will become obvious to her and everyone else. Rachel's voice rose once more, a jagged crescendo of entitlement. "I'm not moving. He gets this seat. I don't care what anyone says." Her son chimed in, adding volume and confidence to her tantrum. The two of them a synchronized force of arrogance and self-assuredness. The cabin's energy shifted. No longer just a dispute over a seat, it had become a spectacle of hubris. Passengers subtly recorded, whispered, and leaned forward, all unconsciously choosing sides. Rachel's obsession with dominance blinded her to the mounting social pressure and the optics of her actions. I could see the turning point approaching, the moment where her arrogance would push her past reason into vulnerability. Every shout, every gesture, every defiant stomp of her foot brought us closer to that tipping point. I adjusted my position slightly, eyes on Rachel, waiting, letting her overconfidence build the stage for what was coming next. The tension was electric, almost suffocating, as the cabin held its collective breath. The stewardess gave a subtle nod, acknowledging that the time for careful observation was ending. The pieces were in place. All that remained was the execution of the plan, using Rachel's pride, her son's obliviousness, and the cabin's silent audience as instruments of poetic justice. Rachel, convinced of her imminent triumph, didn't notice the trap forming around her. She was the architect of her own downfall, and the first moves had been made. The storm was ready to break, and when it did, it would leave no doubt who held the advantage. The cabin held its suspense, the moment stretching taut, waiting for the inevitable unraveling of entitlement and arrogance. And in that pause, I could almost feel the anticipation building, the energy coalescing for the decisive act that would turn chaos into satisfaction, arrogance into humiliation, and finally, justice into spectacle. Rachel's face had turned a deep, almost unnatural shade of red, veins standing out on her neck as she flailed in frustration. Every shout, every stomp, every aggressive gesture she made now served only to tighten the invisible noose around her own ego. Her son, still recording, laughed nervously for a moment, then froze as he realized the angle of his camera was capturing more of his mother's rage than his own heroic presence. The cabin was electric, passengers holding their collective breath, watching the slow collapse of entitlement in real time. I stayed seated, calm and deliberate, letting Rachel exhaust herself while subtly guiding the cabin crew toward quiet interventions. The stewardess approached again, smiling politely but firmly, placing a gentle hand on Rachel's arm. "Ma'am, we need to make sure everyone is seated safely. Please allow your son to move to another seat where he will be comfortable and secure." Rachel recoiled, as though the words themselves were an attack. "No, he's not moving. This is unacceptable. Do you think you can dictate terms to me?" Her voice rose another octave, drawing the attention of even more passengers. The son glanced at her, uncertain now, a flicker of doubt replacing the smug confidence he'd worn so proudly. I leaned slightly toward Sarah and whispered, "Watch. This is the moment it all turns." The son, distracted by the increasingly chaotic scene and the cabin's subtle disapproval, finally hesitated. His fingers fumbled with the phone, dropping it slightly, giving a passenger behind him a clear view. The device, streaming the meltdown live, had become a mirror, reflecting the absurdity of Rachel's tantrum to everyone who cared to see. Murmurs of suppressed laughter and astonishment rippled through the cabin. Rachel, sensing her perceived control slipping, grew more desperate. She gestured wildly, knocking over a half-full water cup from the seatback tray, the liquid cascading onto the aisle carpet. The sound was sharp, punctuating her collapse with a comic note that passengers couldn't help but notice. Her son flinched, realizing the optics of the moment were not in their favor. "Mom, maybe we should just," he began, voice uncertain. But Rachel cut him off sharply, her pride refusing to yield. "No, don't tell me what to do. I am in charge here." The stewardess used this opening, guiding the son gently but firmly toward another empty seat several rows back. He resisted slightly, then complied, embarrassed, realizing the futility of arguing. Rachel's furious gaze followed him, mouth opening to protest, but words failed her for a moment. The cabin had grown quiet, the tension palpable, yet the silence underscored her failure. I finally spoke, calm but loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "The window seat is yours, Sarah. He is now seated comfortably, and we all remain safe. That's the fair solution." Rachel's shoulders stiffened. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, searching for a retort that could salvage her pride. But nothing came. Her son, now seated safely, avoided eye contact, realizing his mother's meltdown had drawn public scrutiny he hadn't anticipated. Passengers subtly recorded, whispered, and exchanged looks of quiet triumph at the downfall of entitlement. The final collapse came when Rachel attempted a last dramatic flourish, pointing a finger at me as though I were the villain. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Her voice quivered, anger mingled with embarrassment, as she realized the spectacle was no longer in her favor. The cabin's attention was no longer on the son, but on her unraveling. I leaned back, letting her words hang uselessly in the confined space. "It's over when you stop throwing tantrums. Public or private, pride doesn't grant special privileges," I said quietly, letting the weight of observation settle over her. The irony was subtle but devastating. She had created the drama that now humiliated her, her own aggression acting as her undoing. Her son glanced around nervously, the phone forgotten in his lap, a silent witness to the truth unfolding. The stewardess returned to her duties, smiling faintly at the subtle victory, while passengers quietly applauded in small gestures of acknowledgement. The collective weight of social accountability had struck, not with force, but with undeniable optics. Rachel's fury now turned inward. She shifted, glaring at the aisle, fists clenched, chest heaving. Her son tried to offer a sheepish smile, but Rachel ignored it, caught in the spiral of public embarrassment and private frustration. The bright yellow of her polo seemed almost garish under the cabin lights, highlighting every crease of tension in her face. I glanced at Sarah, whose face now relaxed in cautious relief. "We did it," she whispered. Her voice was small but filled with satisfaction, the release of anxiety finally visible. She stretched slightly, the book forgotten, now simply observing the aftermath of Rachel's downfall. Rachel's dramatic attempts to reclaim control had failed utterly. She sank slightly into her seat when she was finally guided back, the weight of humiliation heavy on her shoulders. Her son's phone continued recording, capturing the final, unintentional evidence of her meltdown, destined to be replayed in silent judgment by anyone who viewed it. As the plane settled into cruising altitude, the cabin returned to a semblance of calm. Passengers adjusted, some exchanging discreet nods of approval, others quietly smiling at the poetic justice they had witnessed. The tension dissipated slowly, leaving behind the clear imprint of Rachel's defeat. I leaned toward Sarah, a wry smile touching my lips. "Next time, maybe the window seat comes with a Karen-free guarantee." She chuckled softly, relief evident in her eyes. "I thought she'd never stop," she murmured. Rachel, still scowling, refused to meet anyone's eyes. Her son slouched, awkward and subdued, the arrogance that had defined him reduced to uneasy silence. The lesson had been delivered without violence, without chaos, yet with maximum impact. Entitlement unchecked becomes its own trap. Passengers returned to their own devices, but the ripple of what had just occurred lingered. Phones discreetly captured the scene from different angles, the story already spreading quietly among the observant. Rachel's dramatic fall from self-assumed authority had transformed a simple seat dispute into a cautionary spectacle, an unforgettable lesson in humility and consequence. As the flight continued, Sarah rested against the window, finally able to enjoy the view she had claimed. I observed quietly, satisfaction tempered by caution, knowing that some battles require patience and observation more than immediate confrontation. Rachel remained a storm subdued, not by force, but by her own inflated sense of control. The cabin hummed with the soft rhythm of the plane, passengers settling into normalcy. Yet the memory of the scene, of Rachel's unraveling, would linger, a subtle reminder that arrogance and aggression often plant the seeds of their own downfall. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained, whispered in looks exchanged across the aisle, in the suppressed chuckles of those who had witnessed the spectacle, and in the lingering sense of justice finally served. Sarah smiled faintly, finally relaxed. "Thanks for handling her," she said. I nodded, keeping my eyes on Rachel briefly. Her defeat was complete, her lesson unmistakable. Yet as the plane glided through the sky, I knew this was the kind of story passengers would recount later, a tale of confrontation, cleverness, and the satisfaction of seeing pride undone. Rachel sank into her seat, muttering under her breath, while the son buried himself in a book, phone forgotten. The quiet satisfaction of justice, earned through patience, observation, and strategic action, had settled over us. And as the cabin lights dimmed slightly for the flight, the sense of anticipation that had gripped the space slowly transformed into calm, leaving only the clear imprint of what had transpired. A battle of pride and entitlement had been fought and decisively won, with the consequences visible for all who had watched. The story was resolved, the karma delivered, yet the memory of it promised to echo long after the plane touched down.